Hey, what's going on, Ninth Age? This is Obsidian Anubis, and I'm back with another Ninth Age battle report in the new year. Happy New Year, everyone. So this time I decided to bring my Feral Orc Horde again. This time I decided to bump it up to 4,500, and I'm playing against my opponent who's playing Dread Elves. So if we look at my army list, I have a Feral Orc Warlord with light armor with Tuk-Tek Scarred. He has the Warcry paired weapons, which are the Shady Shinkins, and he has on a Warboar. I have a second Feral Orc Warlord. He is on a Wyvern, with the big wing, light armor and the Basalt Infusion. He has a shield, a lance, and the Dragon Staff. I have a Feral Orc Shaman who's also on a boar. He's a Wizard Adept of Shamanism and has the Magical Heirloom. And then finally, I have a Feral Orc Chieftain with light armor, which is the Essence of Mithril, the BSB, and Great Weapon. For my core, I have 10 Forest Goblin Raiders with shields, light lances, throwing weapons, and a banner. And then 30 Feral Orc Edbashers, Folkman, Green Tide Banner, paired weapons, Mammoth Stabba, and 9 Feral Orc Boar Riders with shields and musician. I gave them shields instead of paired weapons because they were mainly going to be a bunker for my wizard. I didn't really want them going into combat as much as if I could avoid it. In special, I brought 2 Orc Boar Chariots, 5 Dashers, 9 Feral Mounted Edbashers with paired weapons full command. They were the bunker for my general. And then 15 Iron Orcs with musician and banner, because I just had a few extra points. And then the double D Rock Gargantula rounding out my list. Alright, and then for my opponent, they had a princess on a Manicore. I don't know exactly what gear they had, but they ended up having a 2-up armor and a 5-up Aegis, and I believe they were the cult of Yema. They had an oracle who was an adept of occultism, and then a captain BSB with a halberd. For the core, they had 2 units of 5 Dark Raiders with repeater crossbows, a unit of 20 Corsairs with the full command and the rending banner, 15 Corsairs with the musician, and then 3 groups of 10 auxiliary with magicians. And then special, they had 20 Dancers of Yema, 5 Dread Riders, 5 Dark Acolytes, and 3 Medusae, which actually may have been in the Menagerie, but I'll put them in special. Alright, so if we look at my opponent's deployment, we did the, what is it, Dawn Attack? Where you have like 2/3 of the battlefield that you can play on the right or left side, and your opponent deploys on the other side. So that's the one we're deploying. So my opponent was in the back left corner, and I was in the back right corner, I guess, or front right corner. So you can see the 5 Dark Raiders. Next to them are the 5 Dark Acolytes, even though they look like the Dread Knights. Behind them is a Medusa. Next to them are the Dancers of Yema, who have the Banner of Blood. Next to them is the second Medusa. In front of them is 10 Repeater Auxiliary. If we look at the center of my opponent's line, that is actually a field, or kind of a small light forest is what we kind of usually call it as. We have the small unit of 15 Corsairs. Next to that is the third Medusa with 10 Repeater Auxiliary in front of that. Behind them is the Princess on the Manicore, who is my opponent's general. To the left of that is the group of 20 Corsairs, and with them is both the Oracle and the Captain. In front of them are the 5 Dread Knights. And then over here on my opponent's far left flank is another unit of 10 Repeater Auxiliary and 5 more Dark Raiders. So for my deployment, on my right side I have the double D Rock, and then on the hill I have my 2 units of Boar Boys. So on the right I have the core versions, the Feral Boar Riders with the Shaman, and then the left one are the Feral Edbasher Riders with the Feral Orc War Boss. And then in the center of my lines I have my block of Feral Orc Edbashers with the Savage Orc BSB. Behind them are the 5 Dashers. To the left of them is my Feral Orc Wyvern Warboss. In front of them is the 15 Iron Orcs, and on the far left I have my 2 Chariots. And then on the far left, which is not taken in a picture of, I scouted my 10 Goblin Riders. For spells, I had Bring the Pain, Awaken the Beast, and Chilling Howl. And I ended up deploying my entire army first, so I got first turn. And for secondary objectives, we were, is it the King of the Hill? The one where you go after a certain terrain piece, and you try to defile it, basically. So from this picture, you can see on the rock has that small purple circle. That is my opponent's objective, and then mine is that light forest that has that kind of orc spear crossing. So that was my objective. So for movement, I moved up my double D Rock, and I moved up my 1 unit of Feral Orc Edbashers pretty close, and then kind of held the other one back in reserve a little bit. In the center of the lines, I moved up fairly aggressively, My opponent has a lot of shooting, so I think I marched both of them as quickly as I could. And then my chariots, I kind of angled one in case my opponent decided to move the raiders up on top of the hill. In Magic Phase, I got Flux card 8, so I had quite a powerful Magic Phase. Unfortunately, my opponent dispelled Showing Howl, which is really the only one which I wanted to get off. So I think I increased the toughness of my uh, Ed Bashers in case my opponent decided to shoot at them, to making them a little bit more resilient. On the far left of the picture, unfortunately I don't have a, on far left of the battlefield I don't have a picture of it, my Spider Riders managed to kill 4 of the 5 uh, Dread Reapers, the light infantry, light horse cavalry, and they fled off the board, so I got rid of 1 unit at least. So my opponent's turn 1, they were pretty reserve. They moved back for the most part, kind of just reoriented the lines on the right, and kind of moved the Medusa to the front. And then over here on the left side, you can kind of see that they also moved around. I'm kind of making this turtle almost, where you have these cavalry on the sides and then this line of crossbowmen interspersed with the Medusae. In Magic Phase, my opponent managed to blow off 3 of my Feral Orc Edbashers, and then in shooting, my opponent managed to kill 3 more off. So I now only have 3 Feral Orc Edbashers and my general. Luckily, I am Frenzy, so I passed my panic test, but that hurt. So that brings us to Feral Horde turn 2. So I couldn't quite... it was too far away to make a charge this turn, so I decided that I'd have to wear another round of shooting before I could do the charge. So I moved up both my infantry behind the wall to give them a little bit of cover, moved the chariots around so they could start charging. I did declare a charge with my general into the Dark Acolytes. And unfortunately, I failed that. I just moved forward about 3 inches, so that was unfortunate. And here's kind of the left side of the board. The Spider Riders on the left side, kind of playing chicken with the Dread Knights. So I didn't really get too close because I didn't want my opponent to just charge them and get rid of them. So I'm out just beyond average range. So if my opponent does decide to charge, it's a higher than average charge, and if they make it, it'll kind of take that unit out of the battlefield for a while. So that brings us to Dread Elves turn 2. My opponent decided not to charge the Dread Knights and just kind of move them up on top of the hill so they could get basically a flank of my entire army, which is a pretty good move, and moved up the Corsairs to take their place. Over here on the right side, the Daughters of Yema decided to kind of move out to go after the spider. The other acolytes kind of moved back a little bit as they could see that I was going to probably charge them next turn. At the bottom of this picture, you see that there's a small 4-sided dice next to the wizard. So on my previous turn, I did get Showing Howl off, which did help, but unfortunately I miscast with 3 6s. I rolled 4 dice, so it was quite damaging. Luckily, I managed to save one of my Aegis saves, so I took 2 wounds, so I'm still alive with 1 wound remaining. So back to my opponent's turn. Between magic and shooting, my opponent killed 8 of my 9 feral boar boys, so my wizard is now just alone with 1 boar boy as well. So my entire cavalry has basically been destroyed at this point. So this brings us to Feral Orc turn 3. So this turn I declared the Wog, so I charged my general and the 1 remaining boar with him into my opponent's acolytes. I just hid the wizard behind the Feral Orc Edbashers that charged into the Medusa because it was the closest one. My Iron Orcs unfortunately did fail their charge, so they just kind of moved forward. And then one of my chariots made it into the crossbowmen, the other one failed and is going to get charged by my opponent's Dread Knights next turn. And then you can see I moved my spiders up to basically chaff, so my opponent couldn't wiggle around next turn. In Magic Phase, I managed to get Flux card 5, and I think I got Chilling Howl off again? No, I think I went for... I think my opponent dispelled Awaken the Beast, but I got Bring the Pain off. So this is what it looks like actually after. So this is my opponent's turn now, so this is turn 3 for my opponent. So you can see that my chariot, the one that made the charge, broke the Repeater Auxiliary and chased them down, although I didn't quite catch them. You can see that they've rallied at the very top of this picture. My Feral Orc adventurers ran through the Medusa and then clipped into one of the group of Repeater Auxiliary. And then on the far right, my general is alone and managed to kill, I think, 2 of the Dread Acolytes, but did manage to hold, but is alone and probably going to die soon. So on my opponent's turn, which is what this picture is showing, you can see that my opponent charged the Corsairs into my Spider Riders. My opponent charged the Dread Reapers into my, sorry, the Dread Knights into my chariot, which failed its charge, and it actually fled and got away. My opponent charged the second group of auxiliary into my Iron Orcs just to clear the way so that my opponent could charge the second unit of Corsairs and their general into my Feral Orc Advashers. And then over here on the right side, you can see that the Daughters of Yema, they moved up. I don't think they tried to charge. I think my opponent just moved them up because I was holding back, more or less just trying to bait that unit away from the middle engagement. I didn't think I could win that fight with the Double D Rock alone, so I just was kind of baiting them to get them out of position. In shooting or magic, my opponent managed to take off the last wound of my wizard, so my wizard is now dead. And then in combat, managed to put, I think, 2 wounds on my general. He broke from combat, and the Medusa chased him and killed him, so he is now dead, which definitely hurt. In combat here on the left, you can see my Spider Riders. I lost 5. I maybe did a wound or 2. I broke. My opponent just reformed. And then here in the center of the battlefield, it was quite a bloodbath. My opponent killed off about a rank and 1 extra guy, so killed 7. You can see I butchered both the auxiliary and the Corsairs. I think I put, no, I don't think I put any wounds on the general. I think my opponent passed all the armor saves. However, I did win combat by quite a bit, and my opponent did break. I chased the Corsairs on the fact that the general, we were pretty close to the edge of the board, so it's very likely the general was going to go off the board. So I decided to chase the infantry, which might not have made it. I ended up catching and wiping them out, and both the auxiliary and I think the general fled off the board. So that was a huge swing of points in my favor, which was great. And then you can also see that the auxiliary that charged into my Iron Orcs lost and are fleeing as well. Alright, so that brings us to Feral Horde turn 4. So I charged my Nash Dashers into my opponent's Acolytes, just moved my Spider around just out of arc of my opponent, moved my Iron Orcs into the forest for the light forest for the objective, and turned around my Ferals. I charged my chariot into the rallied auxiliary on the far left of this picture. I don't have any magic, so straight to combat. My Nasher Dashers went in and killed 2 of the Dark Acolytes, and I lost 2 in return. I won combat, but not by enough to make my opponent flee, so they stood there. I also charged my second Feral Orc Warboss into my opponent's Corsairs. I killed 5 of them, but I took a couple wounds in return, which was somewhat surprising. I was surprised how many wounds I took. I mean, he only has like a 5-up armor, so he's not really all that well protected. He has a 5-up armor and a 5-up Aegis, but if you're like me, I never pass an Aegis save, so it's really just a 5-up armor save, which doesn't do a whole lot of good. My opponent did pop the Rending Banner this turn, so they were fighting with AP 1 as well, so I only had a 6-up armor save. And so this is my opponent's turn 4. You can see they kind of moved the Dread Knights into the center to maybe get a flank or rear charge on my Iron Orcs. Moved the Dark Reapers around on the top right, and then moved between the Medusa and the Dancers, basically boxed into my Spider so it couldn't go anywhere else. And then in combat, my opponent managed to kill off my Orc Warlord on the Warboss. The Weaver, excuse me. Again, I thought he'd be a little bit more resistant than this, and he actually both my Feral Orc Warlords went pretty quick. They only had this one had a 5-up, the other one had I think a 4-up, and then a 5-up Aegis, but that was not enough, and they both popped pretty quickly. So now I'm down 3 characters, so I only have my BSB remaining. Alright, and in combat with the Dark Acolytes, my Nashers managed to kill the last Acolyte, but he did manage to kill 2 of my Nashers before he died. But at least I managed to finally get rid of that magic source. So then on Feral Orc turn 5, I charge the one remaining Nasher into the flank of uh, the auxiliary just to hold them up so they couldn't basically shoot at my ferals. I turned my Iron Orcs around so they wouldn't get a front charge if my opponent decided to charge the knights into them. And then I also charged my chariot into the unit of uh, Corsairs. I also charged my spider on the far right of this picture into the Daughters of Yema because I couldn't get away from them any longer, so I figured I might as well charge and just see what I could do. I didn't think I could win that fight, but it was turn 5, so I was hoping I just wouldn't die by the end of the game. I did manage to also rally my chariot and positioned it so hopefully it can come in next turn to help the spider if it's still alive. So Dread Elf turn 5. My opponent unfortunately broke my chariot, which you can see to the right of this picture, which fled through everything, and then charged into the flank of my Iron Orcs. Because I had positioned so that the knights were in my front, the Corsairs were actually in my flank. So, I mean, he only has a few attacks. My chariot did manage to kill my opponent's BSB at least, so they don't have a huge character in there or anything. They just have basically Corsairs and a sorcerer or an Oracle who is not all that powerful. But we'll see how that goes. And then over here on the right, my spider did pretty well. So this is actually after both my round of combat and my opponent's round of combat. So the first round I went in, I ended up killing 7 of my opponent. I think I did a total of 8 wounds, and my opponent only passed 1 of the 4-up Aegis saves. So they were pretty upset that the Aegis saves were definitely not in their favor. And then this is after my opponent's round of combat. So you can see that my spider has, I think it has 7 wounds at this point. So I only have 1 wound remaining. The Medusa, which is actually kind of back an inch or so, it actually charged into the spider this round on my opponent's turn, but I did manage to kill it completely. So that's why it's kind of pushed back a ways. But it, I think, is actually the one who did like 3 or 4 wounds. I did manage to hold at least, though, so that was good. And then on Feral Orc turn 6, I charged my chariot into the Daughters. Unfortunately, they went before my spider was able to go and managed to kill the spider. So then my chariot my opponent moved over. So I think my opponent won combat, or actually I might have won combat, but my opponent stayed put. In close combat over here on the left, my opponent managed to kill only 1 Iron Orc. However, I don't think I did anything in return, and my opponent had a few more points than me. So I think I was down like 2 points maybe, and I couldn't roll a leadership test. Even with my BSB right there, I failed both of my, I think they were 6-ups with a -2, and fled, and my opponent caught them and chased them down. So my opponent's final turn of the game moved the auxiliaries towards the objective, broke my chariot, and actually just did a reform and moved toward, well, it didn't move, it did a reform so they were within 6 inches of my opponent's objective. Yeah, so that's how the game ended. It was pretty much a pretty bloody battle. We lost a lot of troops. I still have my huge unit of Feral Orc Edbashers and my BSB, so that was a lot of points. And I had both my chariots, although one was fleeing at this point, so it was at half points. But the other one, I think, had only taken 1 wound, so it was still fine. So it ended up being a difference of 281 points. I got 3,919 from my opponent. My opponent got 3,638 from me. So it's a difference of just over 280. So that actually makes it an 11-9. Both of us had 1 unit within 6 inches of our objective, so no one got the secondary objective. So it was a Pyretic Orc and Goblin victory. So I did win, but it was very costly, and it was just a minor win at that. But it was a really fun game. I think both me and my opponent had a great time. It was actually nice because sometimes one of us just steamrolls the other one, and so it's like a 20-0 almost. This one was nice because it was much more of a bloodbath, and it was more even throughout the game. I think losing my 2 cavalry units at the beginning of the game definitely hurt. I mean, neither of them made it into combat, and both my warlords died pretty quickly once they got into combat, so I may have to rethink about how I'm going to build them. Just they'll 4-up and 5-up armor save, and then 5-up Aegis save is just not enough to hold them in combat, even if the toughness is 6 or 5. My opponent just rolls too many 6s and they die too quickly, so I'll probably have to work around with that. But it was a great game, and I think we're gonna try to get another game in. I think we're both gonna tweak up our list a little bit. But yeah, it was really enjoyable. If you guys have any comments, please put those in the comment section below. And as always, hit like and subscribe, and game on.